October was generally a cool, crisp month in southern Ontario, a month Megan looked forward to all summer long. Not one for heat or sweating, Dee and Summer decided to visit. Today, though, the intense midday sun pounding down on her head and shoulders was something to which Megan was oblivious. As her runners struck the pavement in a steady, rhythmic slap, all she could focus on was pushing forward. Her honey-colored hair streamed out behind her, the sunlight picking out the red and blonde strands, shifting, floating, giving her appearance a shimmery, ethereal look. Arms tucked close to her body, she pushed herself to move faster. Her body surged forward and her feet seemed to barely touch the ground. Megan had decided to take up running over a year earlier. She'd been looking for something to help her deal with the stress of being a medical intern. Long, idle hours spent in cerebral pursuits had taken its toll on her body, and when one of her professors had suggested that taking up exercise would help with her anxiety as well, she figured it was worth a try. In the first few weeks, Meg had almost quit a dozen times. It was an almost unbearable struggle to drag herself out the door and run. Her legs had burned, her chest had heaved, but she kept going. Unlike a lot of her friends who also ran, she never did grow to enjoy it. She liked it for what it did to her anxiety levels, but most of all, she kept at it because of her loved ones. Her grandparents and parents had a history of high blood pressure and heart problems, and Meg decided that she owed it to herself and her family to do everything she could to combat that history. So every time she strapped on her shoes, she thought of her dad, who died when she was only 12 of a heart attack, of her grandfather, whom she had never had the chance to meet, and of her mom, more like a best friend than a mother to her, who battled her own heart attack only 2 years earlier and had won. She thought about them all, and this time was no different. As the air was ripped from her lungs in gasping breaths, Megan's mind couldn't help picturing her family's faces in her mind. Step after step she pushed on, only peripherally aware of the people sitting on benches, their noses buried in cell phones, laptops, and tablets as she flew by them. Turning a corner, Megan stumbled over a crack in the pavement, causing her to pinwheel her arms, desperately trying to stop herself from falling. As she twisted to halt her downward momentum, she could see behind her, and her heart flared painfully against her chest. She burst forward like an Olympic sprinter, fear clawing its way up her throat, her body no longer controlled by her mind, but instead a mindless instinct for self-preservation. She managed half a dozen steps before being struck hard from behind, and felt herself again pitching forward. At the last moment, she tilted her pelvis backwards in a way that allowed her to fall backwards instead of face down. As she connected with the pavement, she brought her palms up in an attempt to keep her attacker from pinning her to the ground. She struggled against the heavy weight pressing on her, and her heart lurched again as the person's face came into sharp relief. The figure was male, with dark hair that flopped boyishly across his forehead. His eyes were watery and lifeless, fixed on some point beyond her, the tear ducts crusted with milky emissions. His nose was crusted with green mucus which had traveled down the lower part of his face and down his neck, thick and plentiful, with the corner of his mouth, chin, and throat also featuring a liberal helping of blood. He pushed forward against her hands, his teeth snapping repeatedly at her face, a low, guttural sound working its way out of his mouth. Meg flailed against the heavy figure, swinging up her legs, kicking and straining her hands to push it off her, but couldn't budge it. She turned her face to the side to avoid the teeth catching her nose, and noticed a man sitting on a bench a few feet from her, engaged in a phone conversation while fiddling on the phone screen. Meg opened her mouth to yell for help, but paused as she saw a figure coming up behind the man. The figure was very much like the one pinning her to the ground, all lifeless eyes and body secretions. As she took a breath to scream out a warning, she felt a sharp pain in her throat as teeth tore through skin and muscle in a chewing motion. All that came out was a dull gargle. As her vision dimmed, she watched the man on the bench meet the same fate as she, he never really seeing what hit him, his attention focused inward until it was too late.